The Forbes magazine on May 1st, 2018 had an article written by Eric Jenkins. And the title of it said that a study finds that half of Americans, especially young people, feel lonely. It says this: a new study has found that nearly half of Americans feel lonely, with young people in particular experiencing the brunt of the pain. Health insurer Cigna took a nationwide survey of 20,000 adults and found that 54% of respondents said like they feel no one actually knows them well. Additionally, 56% of people said the people they surround themselves around are not necessarily with them. And approximately 40% said they lack companionship. Their relationships aren't meaningful, and that they feel isolated from others. The research that was released was based on UCLA's loneliness scale. I didn't even know they have a scale for everything now. Loneliness scale was pioneered by our very own University of California, Los Angeles. Using measurements scientifically calculated by a mix of statements and a formula. Wow, they have a formula for loneliness. Researchers found that anyone with a score between 20 and 80 feel lonely. The higher the score, the more likely it is the person feels significant social isolation. He said that the person who was leading this said that social isolation also can have an effect on health. There's a blurred line between mental and physical health. Oftentimes, medical symptoms present themselves and they are correlated with mental, lifestyle, behavioral issues like loneliness. Now, here comes the most alarming part. So the survey found the younger Americans are hit harder by loneliness. The generation born between the mid-1990s and early 2000s, the Z, or whatever they are called, is coming to age now, and they feel lonely the most, researchers found, which is several of our children. Those respondents had an average loneliness score of 48.3, compared to the average score for all Americans, which was 44. Millennials, the older ones, meanwhile, scored 45.3. Loneliness is a major problem. It's in fact one of the biggest problems encountered by people who live not just in this country, especially in large metropolitan areas like the Bay Area or New York or elsewhere. Why are people lonely, if we ask that question? The reason people are lonely is because it gets really difficult once you become close with someone and you encounter each other's dark sides to continue to be friends. So it is in this backdrop I want to present this passage that Jesus is talking to us. We started off by saying how Jesus is telling us that as Christians, he says, you and I are called to be the salt and light of the world. And then he went on to say, if you and I can be a salt and light to the world, we need to display a character, a holiness, a righteousness that is far bigger and deeper than just the religious people do. And Jesus is an awesome teacher and a preacher, and he just doesn't leave things in generalities. Now he comes down to the specifics, and he says in the next several verses, he uses the phrase, it was said, you have heard that it was said to you, but now I tell you, for 6 times. And he says each of the 6 times he takes up one issue and says how in that area we can be different. And guess what is the first area that Jesus focuses on in his Sermon on the Mount that he says is going to make a difference between someone who knows him who does not? Relationships. Relationships. What he's saying basically is, if you know me, If you let me be the king of your life, you're not going to be a lonely person, because I'm going to come inside your heart. I'm going to come into the center of gravity of your life, and I'm going to take away all those things that cause loneliness, which we are going to see, and transform your relationships. If you are truly an authentic disciple of Jesus, if you are someone who have tasted the love of Jesus, if you are someone who has embraced Jesus as your king, he says, you will never be lonely. And that is what I want to unpack for us this evening. What would be your loneliness scale today? I don't know what the formula is. Maybe you can look it up and Google it or find it. But you pretty much don't need a score because you know how lonely you are. If that is the case, I want you to join me today in this passage and see how we can break out of that and experience these authentic, deep relationships that Jesus says he's going to give. So, because the good news is you don't have to be lonely. And when our relationships get transformed like this, he says, that is going to be so beautiful for the world around us. And that's what's going to make you a salt and light. They're going to look at you and say, wow, I feel so lonely. How come you are not like that? What is the difference? Can you tell me, please? That's the power of the gospel, and you will have an opportunity to do that. The gospel, the first thing it does is impacts our relationships and changes it upside down. So why do relationships break? You see, whether it's between friends or in marriages or even professionally at work sometimes. Usually it's when one or the other person says something or do something or touches on something that's very important or sacred for you, that it causes anger, and then it's over. There are two types of angry people. One group are those who express anger in a passive way. And the other group are those who express anger in an active way. A classic example of someone expressing anger in a passive way is if you are married to that person, you will know, because when they get angry, they give you the silent treatment. They will not yell, they will not scream, they just go silent. That can be brutally hard. Or your friends. Sure, if you're at school or other social environments. Well, the other category, they'll just lash out, with words or actions or throw things or do whatever you want. I have 3 kids, and 2 of the 3 kids display one of these. I won't tell you which of them. I don't want you to judge my kids. But guess what? Both are wrong. It's not like one is better than the other. Oh, just because someone's quiet, their anger is better, and someone lashes out, their anger is bad. No, both are bad. But you see, the religious people of those days, the Pharisees, they redefined the whole thing. Because, not everyone who gets angry goes and commits murder, right? So when the Pharisees redefined it by saying, you shall not murder, because if you murder, you will have judgment, they made this whole thing as one-dimensional. So if you have not acted out, you can be angry inside. But you have not acted out, then you're fine. You can go. And that's the first thing Jesus says, that's not true. I'm going to tell you he says, your righteousness should be bigger than the Pharisees, and this is how it's going to be bigger. He makes this multi-dimensional. He beautifully unpacks that. Brief verses. Let's go verse by verse and see what it is. The 3-dimensional display of what anger is. He says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. This is like beautiful rhetoric. 3 parallelisms, Three parallel statements he stacks up, where he just makes them go stronger in intensity from one to the other. The first one, everyone who is angry with his brother. Second one, whoever insults his brother. Third one, whoever says you fool. The first one talks about the word anger is the word orge, from which comes orgy. It's this deep, emotional, messed up display of uncontrolled emotions. So he says if you have anger itself, you will know how you have that. Because if you have ever broken up with someone in a relationship, or if you're married and you're so angry and you don't want to talk to your spouse because they said or did something, or if you have done that with your friends, or if there is this colleague at work who is so menacing and you just don't want to see that guy or girl's face, guess who gets sleepless nights? You. Because anger eats you up. It just messes you internally. It's like a corrosive acid that just eats your heart out. So that's why Jesus says, it's not only good for your soul and your body, that's going to lead you to judgment. What is anger then? Anger is the point at which you consciously decide to stop loving a person. It's basically anger. It's lovelessness. You lose love for that person either temporarily or when repeated multiple times permanently. And once that happens, it doesn't stay like that. It gets you in multiple ways. Then you start acting it out. And Jesus says that's a problem. The two ways in which you can act out your anger, the first one, he says, whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And secondly, whoever says you fool or raka will be liable to the hell of fire. Why is that? Why was murder wrong in the first place? If you look at the Old Testament or in laws of many nations, murder was wrong because every human being has the dignity of being made in the image of God. Even the fallen human being carries with him a trace of that image of God in him. So that was the reason in the Pentateuch it said, if you kill someone, you're taking away the dignity of the image of God from that person. And no one has the right to do that. What Jesus is saying is, you don't necessarily have to use a weapon and kill someone to take away their dignity. You can use words that are more sharper than any weapon could. When you insult your brother, or when you use the word raka, the word raka is the same word. In Greek, the word is moros, from which comes the English slang that people sometimes use in a defamatory way, calling someone as moron. You moron. You probably heard that when you were in your school or in your colleges. The word moros, literally translated raka, is idiot. When to murder someone means you murder their reputation. But even more, if you say this to someone, you murder the confidence they have in themselves because you actually want them to believe that. And when you get them to believe that, you have put a dagger in their heart that no surgeon can get to. By saying, because you did this, you are basically saying, because you said this or because you did this, you are worth nothing to a person who has been made in the image of God, whose worth comes from being made in the image of God. And you have not only insulted them externally, if you go and talk about that to others, destroying and murdering their reputation, but you have done it to them personally too. And the word anger, again, as I said earlier, it means to swell up with poison. And so that's why Jesus says, if you either have this intense emotion that's eating you up, poisonous, that's poisonous for you and others, or if you destroy, if you want to act it out in a way that you want to call that person a moron or idiot. And by the way, parents, if you use that on your kids, please don't. That's not a word you use even when you're angry on your own children, because they will believe it if you keep saying that repeatedly. Our children are worth much more than that, and they are so much more beautiful. It does not justify using that on our kids. And look at the consequence. He says, the first time he says, if you have that emotion, you're liable to judgment. The second time he says, if you insult someone, you're liable to a counsel, because there was an accountability. You are not living alone. People can come and ask you. And the third time he says, if you do this, you're actually going to face the hell of fire, which means he's saying someone who really knows the true gospel can't do this, because the one who's going to go to the hell of fire is someone who does not know Jesus. Now, when you read this, you are like, wow, man, this is so hard. I don't think any of us are here in this room who can say, I never get angry. So what do? I do get angry. There are times in anger I act it out in one way or the other. So what do? See, this is where the Pharisees would leave you hanging in the air. Because the law, what it can only do is reveal your sin. The law can never help you to actually be good or display your righteousness. And that's why Jesus says, I have come to give you a righteousness apart from the law, my own righteousness. But for that, you need to first see that you need that. And if you are sitting and you are thinking, I am a nice person most of the time, I never hurt anybody. I never do any bad things to anybody. And that is what we hear when we talk to our friends. If you ask them, who do you think you are? They would say, I'm a nice person. I don't kill people. I don't do stuff. But then if you go the next level and ask, have you ever been angry? And you put these criteria that Jesus gives, I'm sure we all would say that we have. But the first step is to come to the point to say that, yes, God, I can meet this. This is, I don't murder, but this standard is just so high, and my heart is wretched. And that's the beauty of the gospel. That is what the law does. That is what the law, he says in Galatians 3:24, is a schoolmaster to lead you to Jesus. And that's the first step. And if you are here and saying, God, I have this in my life, and I don't know how to get over this, will you forgive me? And he says, yes. Because when you go to Jesus, he's going to do something for you that you have never experienced before. When you go to Jesus and when you look at the cross, he's going to do some unearthly thing where the people who are crucifying him, he is praying for their forgiveness. Never happened, can never happen in the world. So what do? What does the righteousness greater than that of the Pharisees actually look like? He gives a solution. First is you go to him and you embrace this king who is going to come into your life and change you, help you, give you the power to not be angry. We are going to see that in a minute. But the immediate thing to be done, he says, is this. In verse 23 and 24 till 26. So read with me if you have your Bibles or if it comes up on the screen. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court. Here is the second scenario. The first scenario was that of a church, where you're in a church and he says, you remember that someone has something against you. The second scenario is the court setting. It's a legal setting. It says, come to terms with your accuser, where someone is telling you that you have done something wrong. In the first case, you are saying that someone has done something wrong. It says, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you be put in prison. And there is a veiled reference to the judgment of God right here. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you see the last penny. So in these two cases, he brings these two case studies, two scenarios. He says, if you're coming to church and you recognize that someone's done something wrong, you go. And the second scenario, in the second case, he says, if someone accuses you of having done something wrong, and again we read that in Matthew 18 as a principle, it still says you go. The commonality in both of this is, what Jesus is basically saying is, go. You go fix it. It doesn't matter if you were wronged or you were the one who caused the wrong. So how do we fix this? How can I fix my anger? And how can I have reconciliation of relationships? Again, we need to ask ourselves the question, why do we get angry? Why are we angry? It's because there's always a place for righteous anger. The Bible never says do not get angry. We have to get angry for the right reasons. But we all can agree that 90 to 99% of the time our anger is not because of some righteous, noble reason. We get angry because something we consider as precious or defining of us or important for us has been attacked. It could be a project that you have been working on and now someone comes and tries to take all the glory for it. Or it could be something that's some very important person in your life. And usually in marriage counseling situations, I can see this literally where the husband starts complaining about the wife's parents. Or the wives start complaining about the husband's parents. Eventually, when they fight, the way they attack each other is to just call names about their in-laws. I know none of you guys do that. I'm just saying generally, like outside. So when you know which buttons to push, right? And that's what he says. Either my identity or my character or my family. But then we need to ask ourselves the questions. Was it really that more precious than Jesus himself? Is this really what defines who I am? If we find that the reason we get angry is because it's related to our identity that is being threatened, or someone says something to you about your looks or who you like, or pleasure, or related to anything other than Christ, we just need to have a recalibration of our heart and say, no, this doesn't give me my worth. This is not that important than Jesus himself. And guess what? You become free. Until then, that thing has power over you and control over you. That doesn't define me. And that's what Jesus says. When you come to me and see that this is the heart that you have, I will show you what was it that has taken my place in your life, which is creating anger for you. It means that I am not the king in your life and in your heart. Somebody else or something else is the king, and that's what makes you angry. So you just need to come, that now you have seen that you have this, and come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. When you let this go and confess before Jesus, it says, Jesus, I want you to be my king, Jesus, because that's what the sermon is all about, his kingdom. All of us get ticked off by something, and for me, one of the things was when I go to some big event or when I am traveling, I like to be super early, on time or punctual. And if that gets messed up, I get really worked up, partly because of my fear, and I like things to be done. And in our home, we are very different, my wife and I. My wife is a very cool person. Even if the whole world comes crashing down, she'll be totally cool. I don't know how that's possible. But that's usually a point of strife between both of us. You don't want to come to our house when we are about to go on a long trip. Do not come to our house. It'll be chaos. But then something happened. I used to travel to Singapore in my previous job. And once when we were there, we made a trip. We wanted to take a trip to India. And so we had booked a flight. And again, as usual, we went to the flight. Was supposed to leave at 8 o'clock. So we were there at 5 o'clock. And not too many people in the line. I even had a friend come and meet me there at the airport. Some of you may know him, LT Jayachandran uncle, he's from RZIM. So we were having, some dinner, and I go and I check in, and the guy looks at me and he starts giggling at me. And I said, what's wrong? Sir, this is Singapore. When we say 8, it means 8 a.m., not 8 p.m. If it is 8 p.m., we would say it's 20 hours. And LT was right next to me, Jemima was there, and Kersa was there, and it was so embarrassing. But this is what happened after that. LT was joking about it, and he was taking it light, and Jemima was like super cool. She was like, that's okay. We can take another flight and go tomorrow. And that just broke my heart, because if that was me, we would have had a big crowd surrounding us, watching our conversation. I mean, mostly my conversation, which would have been so bad and so loud. And that just really challenged me to say, wow, she's showing me grace. She's showing me mercy. And since then, every time something like that happens, even though everything within me will boil and I want to do, I get reminded of that, and I'm like, no, I don't think I can do this anymore. You see, if you have tasted something like that from someone else, when you get angry about something, then it is easier to do that to others. And that is what happened on the cross. Where Jesus, when he took God's anger upon himself, and the people and you and me nailed him to the cross, he was able to say, Father, forgive them. And that's the King that we have. When we go to him and say, God, I messed up, I cannot do this. I know the demand is so high, but I cannot keep it. And I know that the consequence is hell, because you're a holy God, like we sang, holy, 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 but I cannot do it. And he says, now you are in the right place, because now you are humble, and I will give you grace. And once you have tasted that grace, and once you have seen that who is king in your life other than Jesus, and once you have let that king to be dethroned and let Christ be the king, you can begin to progressively see a shift in anger in your life. And guess what? Now if people wrong you for any of those things, you can go to them and say, if you have wronged them, I'm sorry. I am truly sorry. Can we be friends again? Or if someone has wronged you, and it doesn't matter whether they say sorry or not, because you have tasted that from someone else and God is a righteous judge, you can still go to them and say, that's okay. We can still be friends again. So you don't have to be lonely within the body of Christ. Because you have the same king in your heart as your brother or sister has the same king, who is Jesus. And that's the nature of this kingdom he is building, where it's a beautiful kingdom, because the first thing that defines about the people in this kingdom are they're not lonely people. Nothing can come between them. They are going to display love, the love of Christ, which is so powerful. And guess what? That's going to be the draw for someone who doesn't know Jesus. I'll close with this last story, real thing. I might have shared before. We had a house church in Germany when we lived there. International students and refugees had come. So there was this evening where we were planning an event. We used to have a gospel event every week where one country is highlighted. And there were 5 German students we were discipling, and there were 2 German girls who were organizing that evening in our house. And so they came, and as they were doing it, they found out that they had messed something up. Someone forgot to bring something or whatever. One person was OCD, the things had to be like this. And the other person was like, Jemima, chill. It's right, no problem. You can fix everything. And right when people are about to come, they both start fighting. You don't want to see German girls fighting. Actually, they won't get loud or anything. They will very logically fight, in a very structured manner. And I see that, and I can't even interject because there's no connection. They won't even let me in because it's so logically coherent, their fight is. And guess who walks in? Our first guest of the evening, who happens to be a Japanese attorney who's come as an exchange student to study in the university on law. And what's the attorney's job? He lives for stuff like this, right? So as soon as he comes, my Indian thing goes like, how do I cover this up? I mean, how do I say smile? It's all right, we're just having a good time, but it doesn't work. The Germans won't listen. And so I'm standing here, these two German girls are going at each other, and this Japanese attorney stands there. Remember his name, Atori. And then I'm embarrassed, and I don't know what to do, because after this is the real thing, the gospel thing. We are going to share the gospel and all of that. And then I helplessly watching, and after they fight, they actually, because they are logical, they're able to find the root cause and be resolved. And then they both go back to the kitchen and start cooking and making something. I don't remember what it was. And then I was sheepishly looking at this Tori. I'm thinking he's going to say, well, you Christians are like this. He doesn't say anything. He's quiet. He observes the entire evening. He comes, and we, I don't remember which country that day it was. And then I shared the gospel. And then after that, we had a time of people's reflection. And guess what he says? Japan is a country where only 1% are Christians. It's one of the most unreached nations in the world. He says, this is the first time in my life I have seen two people have a serious conflict and still be friends and work together. I've never seen that. He didn't even need my sermon or message or the songs we were going to sing or whatever else we were doing, the church stuff. This was so powerful for him. He said, this is mind-boggling. How can two people who fight immediately become real friends and actually do something together? That is kingdom life. That's kingdom relationships. And they continue to be friends. And that is what Jesus says He's come to make of you and me. So I don't know where you are today, how lonely you are. Well, if you are lonely, you don't have to be. You just need to ask God to help you find why you are lonely. What is it that is so precious to you that makes you not open up to others? And maybe that is the king of your life, and you let that go and come to Jesus and confess and say, I am an angry person. Will you forgive me, Jesus? I cannot live up to this standard that you have, this three-dimensional standard of righteousness. And will you be my king? And when you do that, you're going to be free. And you don't have to be lonely again. You can go and restore whatever relationship it is, whether it is your friend at school or your own spouse or your coworker who you really claimed you will never want to see their face again. You can be a different person. Let's pray.